For over 500 years, Christopher Columbus's birthplace and family background remained subjects of bitter scholarly dispute. He claimed Genoese origins, but Portuguese, Spanish, and even Polish researchers argued he belonged to their nations based on linguistic clues, maritime connections, and unexplained gaps in documentation. Then, in 2024, genetic scientists completed a decades-long analysis of authenticated Columbus remains, producing the first hard molecular evidence of his ancestry. The DNA revealed markers tied to a specific population group whose presence in Columbus's family tree raises profound questions about why he might have concealed his true background. So, what did this genetic breakthrough actually tell us about one of history's most consequential explorers? The official story begins in Genoa around 1451, where Columbus identified himself as the son of Domenico Colombo, a woolbew weaver. A 1479 notarial document mentions the Colombo family working in the textile trade, and early biographers accepted this as settled fact. Yet Columbus's own writings contradicted the narrative in subtle ways. He never wrote in Genoese dialect, instead using Castilian Spanish almost exclusively in personal correspondence. When he did write in Italian, his syntax showed peculiarities that suggested he had learned the language imperfectly. He rarely mentioned family members by name, an unusual omission for someone who otherwise documented his achievements meticulously. His letters revealed other oddities that puzzled scholars for generations. Columbus occasionally inserted Hebrew phrases into private correspondence. He wrote dates using the Jewish calendar alongside Christian ones, and demonstrated knowledge of Jewish customs that seemed unusual for a devout Catholic navigator. His personal library, inventoried after his death, contained books in multiple languages, but notably lacked works in Genoese dialect. When describing his childhood city, his accounts were strangely generic, missing the specific details of neighborhoods, churches, or local customs one would expect from a native son. These weren't simply gaps in memory. They appeared to be deliberate vagueness. Even Columbus's signature raised questions. He signed documents with a cryptic monogram that scholars have debated for centuries. The arrangement of letters, a triangular pattern of S's, an X, an M, and a Y above his name, it resembled Hebrew letter forms and appeared to carry symbolic meaning. Some researchers interpreted it as a Christian devotional. Others saw coded Jewish references. Columbus never explained the signature's meaning, adding another layer of mystery to his carefully constructed public identity. These contradictions fueled centuries of alternative theories. Portuguese historians noted Columbus had lived in Lisbon for years and had married into a Portuguese noble family, arguing he might have invented the Genoa story to escape debts or criminal charges. Catalan researchers conducted linguistic analysis, showing his spelling and word choices matched patterns from the Valencia region, not northwestern Italy. Some scholars pointed to circumstantial evidence suggesting converso ancestry, the use of Hebrew phrases in private letters, employment of converso navigators and financiers, and careful avoidance of detailed family genealogy during an era when the Spanish Inquisition investigated Jewish lineage obsessively. But documentary evidence was fragmentary, airy, contradictory, and filtered through political agendas. The question remained unresolved. Was Columbus hiding something, or were historians simply reading too much into incomplete records? The mystery deepened when researchers examined Columbus's social network. He maintained close relationships with prominent converso families in Spain, including his primary financier, Luis de Santangel, and his interpreter, Luis de Torres, who was among the first Europeans to set foot in the Americas. De Torres had converted from Judaism just weeks before the voyage. Yet Columbus trusted him with critical diplomatic responsibilities. The explorer also corresponded with Abraham Zacuto, a Jewish astronomer whose navigational tables Columbus relied upon. For a man seeking favor from monarchs conducting an inquisition, these associations carried substantial risk. Either Columbus was remarkably naive about social perception, or he felt a connection to these individuals that outweighed political caution. Columbus's will, drafted in 15,006 shortly before his death, contained unusual provisions. He instructed his heirs to donate money anonymously to poor individuals and specified that the funds should be delivered discreetly without revealing the donor's identity. Some historians noted this resembled the Jewish tradition of tzedakah, where charitable giving is considered most virtuous when done anonymously. And he also established a trust fund specifically to assist a Jewish merchant in Genoa. a detail that seemed inexplicable given his professed Christian identity and the political climate. These testamentary choices, like so much else in Columbus's life, hinted at influences he never openly acknowledged. Columbus died in 156, and his burial became as complicated as his biography. His remains traveled from Valladolid to Seville, then reportedly across the Atlantic to Santo Domingo, possibly to Havana, and finally back to Seville's cathedral in 1898. The multiple relocations left experts uncertain which bones were authentic. Competing cities claimed to hold the true remains, and without scientific verification, the debates continued. In 2003, Spanish authorities permitted DNA extraction from a small lead box in Seville Cathedral inscribed with Columbus's name. Initial testing confirmed the remains were male and roughly the right age, but the samples were badly degraded. Researchers obtained a partial genetic profile, but lacked the reference databases necessary for comprehensive ancestry analysis. The project paused, waiting for technology and data to catch up. The DNA samples presented significant technical challenges. 5 centuries of decomposition, multiple reaerials in different climates, and exposure to varying environmental conditions had fragmented the genetic material. Early sequencing attempts yielded only partial results, enough to establish that the remains were related to known Columbus descendants, but insufficient for detailed ancestry analysis. And the research team preserved the samples carefully, anticipating that future technological advances would eventually unlock the information they contained. 2 decades later, genetic genealogy had transformed. Millions of people had submitted DNA to ancestry databases, creating unprecedented references for population genetics. Dr. José Antonio Lorente at the University of Granada assembled a team to reanalyze the Columbus samples using next-generation sequencing. They also tested remains identified as Columbus's brother Diego and son Fernando, building a family profile to verify relationships and trace inherited markers. The team designed the study to answer a specific question. Could molecular evidence definitively determine Columbus's geographic and ethnic origins? The research took years, cross-referencing the Columbus DNA against populations from across Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. Results came in stages, each raising more questions than it answered. The team employed multiple analytical approaches. They examined Y chromosome markers to trace paternal lineage, mitochondrial DNA to track maternal ancestry, and autosomal DNA to identify broader population affinities. Each type of analysis provided different pieces of the puzzle. They also consulted with historians, linguists, and genealogists, comparing genetic findings against documentary evidence to build a comprehensive picture. The interdisciplinary collaboration was essential. Genetics could reveal ancestry patterns, but historical context was needed to interpret what those patterns meant in 15th century Europe. Yes, the first findings confirmed genetic relationships between the 3 individuals, validating that the remains were indeed from the Columbus family. But the ancestry composition defied expectations. Y chromosome markers pointed to Western Mediterranean origins plausible for both Genoese and Iberian populations, and thus inconclusive for pinpointing nationality. The autosomal DNA, however, showed something unexpected. Statistically significant matches to modern Sephardic Jewish populations, specifically descendants of communities expelled from Spain and Portugal in the 1490s. Certain genetic markers distinctive to Iberian Jewish populations appeared at frequencies inconsistent with a straightforward Christian Genoese lineage. The team ran comparative analyses against Italian populations from Liguria, and finding fewer matches than the Sephardic references produced. The researchers expanded their investigation, testing the Columbus DNA against specialized databases of Jewish populations from across the Mediterranean and Middle East. The markers didn't just indicate general Jewish ancestry. They pointed specifically to Sephardic communities, those who had lived in the Iberian Peninsula for centuries before persecution, forced conversion, or expulsion. The genetic signature carried stories of families who had thrived in medieval Spain, contributed to its golden age of learning and culture, and then faced systematic persecution as Christian kingdoms consolidated power. Some of these families converted to survive. Others fled to North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, or Northern Europe. The Columbus DNA suggested his ancestors had chosen conversion, thus becoming part of Spain's Converso community. To ensure accuracy, The team conducted blind testing where multiple laboratories independently analyzed the same samples without knowing the expected results. All laboratories returned consistent findings. The genetic signature was unmistakable. Statistical analysis showed the probability of these markers appearing by chance in a non-Jewish Genoese family was extremely low. The evidence was as conclusive as genetic science could provide given the degraded sample quality and the inherent limitations of ancestry analysis. The findings suggested Columbus carried substantial Jewish ancestry, most likely Sephardic, possibly through both parental lines or through generations of intermarriage between Converso and Old Christian families. Is this genetic evidence aligned with circumstantial historical clues scholars had debated for decades? Spain's Inquisition, established in 1478, specifically targeted Conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly maintaining Jewish practices. By 1492, all unconverted Jews faced expulsion from Spain. That Columbus secured royal funding in this exact environment, proposed his voyage in this exact year, and maintained unusual discretion about his family background suddenly appeared less coincidental. The political context of 1492 Spain was brutally unforgiving. The Alhambra decree issued on March 31st gave Jews 4 months to convert or leave. Converso families who had converted generations earlier faced ongoing suspicion. The Inquisition employed networks of informants who reported on dietary habits, observance of Christian holy days, and even casual remarks that might suggest hidden Jewish practice. Entire families could lose property, social standing, and freedom based on accusations that were often impossible to disprove. In this environment, any hint of Jewish ancestry was dangerous. Concealment wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Researchers revisited Columbus's own words with the DNA findings in mind. He used Hebrew blessings in private correspondence, referenced the Jewish calendar when dating letters, and employed Converso financiers and crew members. Despite the social risks this entailed in Inquisition-era Spain, his proposal to use New World wealth to fund a crusade to Jerusalem, detailed in his Book of Prophecies, echoed messianic themes common in Sephardic thought during periods of persecution. Whether these were conscious connections to a known heritage or cultural patterns absorbed unknowingly, they formed a consistent pattern once the genetic context was established. The DNA evidence also clarified why Columbus might have obscured his background. Converso families faced systematic discrimination, legal restrictions, and Inquisition investigations. Claiming Jewish ancestry could mean exclusion from royal favor, denial of noble titles, and loss of property. If Columbus knew or suspected his Converso heritage, concealing it would have been essential to achieving his ambitions. Even the choice to identify as Genoese, a wealthy maritime republic with complex records and distant from Spanish Inquisition jurisdiction, would have provided useful ambiguity. The timing of Columbus's first voyage now carried additional weight. He departed on August 3, 1492, the day after the Alhambra decree's final deadline for Jewish expulsion from Spain. As Columbus's ships left Palos de la Fronta, thousands of unconverted Jews were simultaneously leaving Spanish ports under armed escort, forced to abandon homes their families had occupied for generations. Whether Columbus recognized the parallel, whether he felt any kinship with those exiles, remains unknown. But the genetic evidence confirms he shared their ancestry, even if he had hidden it behind a Christian identity and a carefully constructed Genoese biography. Historical records document what happened at the ports that day. Jewish families sold centuries-old possessions for fractions of their value, desperate to convert assets into portable wealth before the deadline. And ships filled beyond capacity as entire communities sought passage to North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, or anywhere that would accept them. Columbus's fleet sailed past these scenes of displacement and desperation. The genetic findings suggest he carried the same ancestral heritage as those being expelled, making the historical moment intensely personal in ways he could never have acknowledged publicly. The discovery has prompted re-examination of Columbus's documented actions, his assistance to Converso colleagues, his silence about his mother's identity, his vague descriptions of Genoa despite claiming it as home. All these now appear as deliberate strategies rather than random gaps. His exaggerated displays of Christian piety, his framing of exploration as religious mission, and his timing of the first voyage's departure the day after the Jewish expulsion deadline take on new significance when understood as a converso navigating a dangerous religious landscape. Genetic testing has also expanded to other figures from Columbus's era, revealing similar patterns among navigators, seagraphers, and court officials. The findings are reshaping understanding of who participated in the age of exploration and what personal stakes they carried beyond glory and gold. Many may have been converso families seeking opportunity, safety, or reinvention, far from Inquisition scrutiny. Still, questions remain unanswered. DNA cannot specify which ancestor was Jewish or when conversion occurred. It cannot tell us whether Columbus consciously knew his heritage or whether family memory had been deliberately erased through generations of concealment. The exact birthplace remains genetically ambiguous. Western Mediterranean ancestry is consistent with Genoa, Catalonia, Valencia, or other regions, and the identity of Columbus's mother, never mentioned in surviving records, stays unknown. Christopher Columbus changed world history by connecting continents. Now, genetic science has revealed a hidden dimension of his own story, linking him to a heritage of survival, concealment, and transformation in an age defined by religious conflict and reinvention.